Fire Emblem games always had many colorful characters in them, and that's true in more than one way for Fire Emblem Engage. Before it even came out, the developers said it would have a smaller focus on the story and writing when compared to Three Houses. But when it comes to the cast, I still think Engage is on par with most of the older FE games. There are many lovable characters to get attached to in this game, and in this video I'll be counting down the 10 that I love the most. Now, just a disclaimer, this video will be very subjective. Everyone was ordered entirely based on how much I personally like them, which can be because of their personalities, because they're really useful, or a combination of the two. Just don't expect an objective tier list. With that established, here is my top 10 Fire Emblem Engage characters. Let me just reiterate this. I like most of the Engage characters, but I can understand why some people don't like this game's overall roster. Most units aren't as fleshed out as the ones in Three Houses, for example, but the Engage cast makes up for it by being very charming, entertaining, or simply funny. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely some one-note or boring exceptions, but I still think the majority of the cast is filled with lovely people like Gold Mary, my number 10. Now, on paper, it sounds like she would get annoying really quickly. She's egotistical, she constantly fishes for praise, and she cries over the dumbest things. But in execution, she's actually hilarious. Gold Mary is self-centered, but in a very absurd way, like bluntly demanding more compliments or unironically saying sorry for being too great. I also have to compliment the amazing delivery on her voice lines. Many characters in this game were really sold to me because of their great voice acting, and that's definitely the case for Gold Mary. She's a character that grew on me a lot recently. It just took a very long time for me to actually give her a chance. Gold Mary already joins you very late, and it doesn't help that she can get outclassed very easily. She uses swords and lances when half of the characters in this game seem to have access to one of these from the beginning or after promoting. Gold Mary is still okay as a unit. Hell, the fact that she's a backup unit makes her useful by default, since that means she can activate chain attacks. She can even learn a skill from her hero class, which will let her perform 2 consecutive chain attacks, which does give her a small advantage over other characters. Then again, you can reclass every character into a hero, so she really only has her above average defense and her decent personal skill to make her truly unique. Yeah, Gold Mary might be a bit outclassed, but she still has her uses, and more importantly, she became one of my favorite characters in the game, which is why she barely got the top spots. So, shortly after beating the game for the first time, I actually did a second playthrough on Maddening difficulty, and it was pretty fun. I mostly used this new run to try out the characters that I benched on my first playthrough, which actually includes Gold Mary and also number 9, Alfred. Let me just say, unless you really like him, I don't recommend using him beyond chapter 9 or so, because there are just way better lance users to replace him with. So, why did I keep using him on Maddening? Well, fun story. I played the first chapters while my girlfriend was watching, and the moment Alfred joined the party, she immediately said that he's her favorite character. And that's it, that's the whole reason Alfred is number 9. Okay, only joking of course, I do have more things I like about Alfred. I actually felt pretty bad for benching him on my first playthrough, since he's always at your side in the story, so I'm happy I gave him another shot. I actually grew to like him a lot when I saw more of his supports. It turns out he's a bit of a himbo, a kind and helpful guy who doesn't always think everything through. Alfred hears people need more water, so he impulsively starts digging a well instead of just going to a nearby river. Aleer says she can't sleep, so Alfred plays the lullaby, but now Aleer can't sleep because of the music playing the whole night. Alfred is just a wholesome bundle of positivity, and to anyone that calls him generic, I'll just say, watch his A support with Celine. I recommend seeing this support for yourself, so skip ahead 20 seconds in this video if you want to remain unspoiled. Celine mentions in a few of her supports that Alfred had a severe illness as a kid, but it turns out he never fully recovered from it. He exercises both to avoid getting sick and to hide his illness from others, since he's afraid people will see him as weak. You just wouldn't expect something so sad for Alfred of all people, and it made me appreciate him so much more. I had to get a bit creative to keep using him on Maddening, but it was worth it to have my bro on the battlefield with me. He's a great guy that definitely gets the happy and satisfying ending he deserved. I'm actually someone who's pretty easily influenced by the opinions of others, to a certain degree. With this game, for example, I often heard people talk about how they liked certain characters I never used much. So I give them a chance, look at some supports to see what the fuss is all about, and surprise surprise, I end up liking them a lot. This is pretty much what happened with half the characters on this list, one of them being Alchrist. Just like Alfred, he got benched on my first playthrough, but I really tried to make him work for a while. It's like there was this mix of bad luck and a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy on Alchrist's part, as he literally never got a strength level up. Thankfully, he was way luckier on my Maddening run, where he turned out to be a very reliable archer that I used for most of the game. Bow users in general just seem to get more useful the further you get in your playthrough, with how many flying enemies the game throws at you. Besides that, it's almost always a good idea to let Alchrist do some chip damage even against regular enemies, since there's a small chance he will get a Luna proc or a critical hit. He's a good unit, but the real reason I started using him was because everyone was saying that he was their new spirit animal. Look, Alchrist definitely didn't make a good first impression. It's one thing to lack self-confidence, but he just takes it to a whole new level. It often gets over-exaggerated and it can be funny in the right situations, but it's just a bit too much most of the time. That's why I'm happy that Alchrist is more than just comic relief. He's shown to be very observant and recognizing of other people's talents, which is a big reason why he always puts others above him. He also does have a spine when it really counts. He's very open with his feelings and intentions, which is something I didn't expect for a socially awkward boy like him. He can be funny, sweet, and he came in clutch for me many times, which makes up for some of his annoying moments. Alchrist is a good boy, and I think a spot in the top 10 is just what he needs for a little confidence boost. I like to think that everyone makes a few mistakes on their first playthrough. One of mine is that I barely used any of the dagger units. Nowadays it's pretty much common knowledge that daggers are broken, but by the time I saw the videos, I was already near the end of the game. The funny thing is that I liked Unaka from the start and I was planning to use her my first time around. It's just that in past Fire Emblem games, I basically used thieves as glorified lockpickers. Back then I only put Unaka in my party if I saw any treasure chests on the map, and when I learned that there are usually other thieves that steal it for you, I just benched her thinking she wouldn't be that useful in combat. Yeah, I was wrong. So there's this strat where people use Corinne's Dragon Vein on her and just watch her dodge everything, which works pretty well. But even before getting the Corinne ring, I already found Unaka really useful. She's one of the best dodge tanks as long as she's on a defensive tile, and the poison debuff from her daggers can be really nice on bosses with huge HP bars. I'm happy she turned out this well, because Unaka was yet another character I regretted not getting to know better on my first playthrough. She seems very fun and spouts off random catchphrases all the time, but it actually turns out to be more of an act. She used to be a thief, but now she regrets her past and wants to change, so she made up her happy persona. This of course comes with a lot of worries about people finding out about her past and on whether or not she's worthy of other people's trusts. And once again, her voice actress really sells this character. The range on Laura's voice is just impressive. There's such a big difference between Yunaka's cheerful catchphrases and her serious assassin side.
You're dead. Another kill for me.
There's also a running gag that Unaka is good at doing impressions, and once again, her voice actress nailed it. I genuinely thought they just copy-pasted a line from Micaiah in here. The impressions are on point. Unaka is a great example of how voice acting can bring a character to life. It really helped to sell her lively personality, and that alone made her worth using. But for real, for all of you people still in the early game, at least try to use one of the dagger units. Try Unaka out, or even Zelkov, they're loads of fun. Oh hey, speaking of Zelkov, there's a reason I placed him right after Yunaka, and that's because their use cases are very similar. They're not exactly the same however. Zelkov's skill makes him a better dodge tank, while Yunaka gets higher critical hit chances. Their stats are also different, and Yunaka can actually become a better tank because of her higher resistance. Because of that, I think Yunaka is a slightly better version of Zelkov if you can get her high leveled enough. However, I still place Zelkov higher because I just like him more than Yunaka. This guy is just an overdramatic theater kid from high school. He has a very mysterious way of speaking, where he puts the emphasis on seemingly random words. And his reason for doing this is both surprisingly deep, but also a bit silly. Zelkov's parents got killed when he was still young, and he became an assassin to take revenge. But once he did avenge his parents, his life just felt empty and he struggled to find a purpose. Ever since then, he started taking up many artistic hobbies, like cooking, painting, brewing medicines, and of course, speaking in a profound way. He basically just does all of these things to avoid getting bored, which is amazing. Zelkov is honestly a contender for my favorite male character. But because it was so hard to decide on my favorites, I made combat usability another factor, which is where Zelkov has some issues. As weird as it may sound, I think he's a bit too good at dodging, since sometimes enemies just don't engage in combat with him. Which is funny, but it's also not ideal. Dodge tanking is also luck based of course, which means there's always a chance that he will die. Still, even if Zelkov was the worst unit in the game, he still would have been carried a lot by his charisma. Everything this guy does is just incredibly amusing, even the little things. One of the funniest things for me is that for his critical hits, he sometimes just starts speaking French out of nowhere.
Incineration, agonie, inhumation.
It's incredibly random, but at the same time, it's just totally in character for him. Zelkov can always manage to get a laugh out of me, and that's definitely worth something. Et c'est pourquoi je lui donne un bien mérité numéro 6. The Psalm characters are interesting, to say the least. They all have very energetic and chaotic personalities for sure, but my favorite of these crazy guys is definitely Pandreo. I remember being put off by his character design at first, but once I got to know him properly, he quickly rose up on my rankings. He's a religious man that parties harder than anyone, and he cries like a wolf for some reason. Look, I'm gonna be honest here, the wolf cries are half of the reason I like him this much. I'm gonna say it again, major props to his voice actor for making Pandreo come over as one of the most energetic characters in this game. But the funniest part about this character is that he's somehow a priest. This guy owns a church and literally turned it into a fucking disco. Despite all of that, Pandreo still manages to have some serious moments, which I also like a lot. His church actually used to be from his neglectful parents. One day they disappeared to look for his sister, leaving Pandreo to take over the church himself. It might be a bit irresponsible to throw parties at that place, but he only does it because he wants to create a space where people can be happy, and it's shown he genuinely cares for the people that visit his church. I also like his relationship with his sister, since we get to see his vulnerable and sober side when they talk about their parents. But to top all of this off, Pandreo is also a very good unit. Right out of the box, he has an S rank in Staves. That alone makes him worth using at any point in the game. But aside from that, he's also a very competent tome user. His high resistance makes him an excellent magic tank, and he can put a good dent in most enemies with his decent magic and speed. All previous characters had at least one major downside, be it their usefulness or a part of their identity. Everyone in the top 5 though is someone I like on both of these aspects. It's only recently that I came to appreciate Pandreo, but he quickly became one of my favorite characters to use. Partially because of his utility, and partially because he cries like a wolf. Fire Emblem Engage hands you a ton of units over your playthrough, and at a certain point, you'll have to pick between them. Some characters are in the same classes, so are you gonna keep using the old units, or will you pick the shiny new one? Engage really seems to encourage the latter option, as most early game units are mediocre, but players can of course still use them if they really like them. Let's take Alfred for example. At chapter 8 you get Amber, who's also a Lance Cavalier and will probably have better stats than Alfred. Hey, listen buddy, you need more than good stats to convince me to use you over Alfred. There's no way you can make me laugh more than him, get out.
I'm crushed, but you looked really cool.
Okay, maybe I'll give him a chance. And yep, that's it. He's the reason I benched Alfred. He had way better stats and more importantly, he just seemed funny. I definitely didn't regret it at the time. His attack already starts off high and it gets even better as Amber has the highest attack rolls in the entire game. His personal skill also gives him more accuracy, which is really nice because I swear to God, the hit rates are rigged against you in this game. Amber's skill makes him very valuable. You can always count on him to break a sword user and he can work as a good physical specialist on top of that. A big reason of why I love Amber so much is admittedly the fact that he carried me so hard, because he's not one of the deepest characters. He's pretty much meant to be a slapstick comic relief, being very clumsy and just stupid at times. Still, I do think he's genuinely funny, and once again, that's partially because of his VA. Some people might think it's annoying, but I think a voice like this suits Amber to a T. Aside from being funny, it's also just endearing to hear him try so hard to look cool or to hear him being surprised after he actually wins.
Hope this looks cool. I won? I won!
Amber is such a simple character, but every single aspect of him just works for me. The jokes are funny, the delivery on his voice is excellent, and it also helps that he's shown to be a very nice guy. I just needed to give Amber a chance to discover how much I like him, and he just happened to join me at the right time for that, which definitely seems in character for him. When I look at how much he helped me out, he damn well earns the title as a legend. Like I said before, I think the majority of the characters in this game are pretty nice, while only a few are really boring. Specifically, I think most characters from the first 8 chapters or so can be pretty one-note, while later ones tend to be more interesting. Despite that, it's still pretty easy to get attached to some of these early game units. They'll be in your army for a long time, so it's pretty easy to warm up to at least one of them, even if they're a bit more bland. I already talked about Alfred, but my favorite of these early game units is definitely Etienne. Everything about her was super appealing to me. Her design? Wish her muscles were a bit more defined, but she looks great regardless. The voice acting? Not what I expected, but I like it. I couldn't wait to use her. Now, I've heard some people say that Etienne is a bad unit, because for some reason the bodybuilder girl has some of the worst defensive stats in the game. People say she's not worth investing in, because what good is a unit who can die in one hit, right? Yeah, have you people ever heard of a glass cannon? It doesn't matter that the enemy can one-shot you if you just kill the enemy first. It also helps that the sniper class gives you higher crit rate when the enemy can't counterattack, which made her a great unit to fish for critical hits with. Thanks to some amazing luck on her level ups, the Etienne on my first playthrough became an absolute monster. By the end game she could reliably kill not only flyers, but also bosses and even dragon enemies. I really like just about everything with Etienne, except her supports. Look, Etienne has the same problem as many other early game characters. Namely that her supports get repetitive really quickly because most of her dialogue has to do with muscles or working out. Because of that, I consider Etienne to be a bit of a guilty pleasure character for me. I can totally understand why she's nothing special for other people, but I just really grew to love her over my playthrough. I loved her energetic, confident personality from the start, and I just kept loving her more after every battle where I used her. Despite her downsides, I still love Etienne, and I doubt anything could ever change that. I already talked about most weapon types in this video, but you might have noticed I haven't mentioned any axe users yet. This was actually a big problem in my first playthrough. I kept using Vander for way too long, and I did use Diamant, but he was starting to underperform, so I was desperate for a good new axe user. And then Panette entered the picture. Let me just say, I did not expect her of all characters to become one of my favorites. But after just one battle with her, I already knew we would get along well. Panette was both one of my strongest soldiers and one of my favorites for her personality. Unlike most axe wielders in Engage, Panette starts off with insanely high attack and HP. This would already make her good, but let's not forget the whole gimmick behind Berserkers, their high critical hit rates. Her personal skill gives her an extra 10% whenever she's not at max HP. If you then slap a killer axe on her, she will very frequently have critical rates around the 50%. It gets even better though, because she has amazing synergy with the Ike Ring. You can inherit his Wrath skill for even better critical chances, and thanks to Panette's high HP, she can soak up some hits for great ether as well. And let's not forget, she's a backup unit, so she can do even more damage. As a unit, she's great, and I can say the same for her character. Panette is actually Pandreo's sister. She ran away from her neglectful parents and wandered the streets for a while. She just used to take her anger out on random people, until she happened to meet the Crown Princess Tamara, who made Panette take her anger out on thieves instead. The two got along well, and eventually Panette became a royal retainer. Somehow. Panette is basically a wild warrior who does her best to act in a fancy way out of respect for Tamara, and I in turn really respect that about Panette. She practices her manners a lot for Tamara, which gives many cute or just plain funny moments. But at the same time, it's also just a lot of fun to see her in action on the battlefield. And it might be a weird thing to say, but Panette has my favorite victory quotes in the game. In half of them, she basically pops off, while in the other ones, she tries to put up her proper lady facade. And I always love when she goes, "My goodness, how awful!" after she just did a Hulk smash on someone. Panette is overall just amazing. I can understand why some people might not like her design, but if you can look past that, you will find an incredible unit with some of the most touching and enjoyable supports in the game. Okay, this number one shouldn't be that surprising. Ivy might just be the most popular character in this game, and for a good reason. I was already a fan of her before the game even came out. I loved her design from the first time I saw it, so I was just praying that she would have a likable personality to go alongside it. Thankfully, Ivy more than delivered. At the point where she joins you, it just felt like most characters were pretty bland. You have some exceptions, sure, but most units up until that point can come over as very repetitive or one note, especially in their early supports. Right away, Ivy sets herself apart, as she's one of the more serious characters, having a lot of issues with gaining everyone's trust and with atonement. So, of course, her supports somehow turn her into one of the biggest dorks in the game. Well, let me put it like this. Ivy has some of the most varied supports in the game. Almost all of them show different sides to her, some serious and some goofy. Aside from actually making us learn more about her like support conversations should do, it also means that they never really get repetitive. Her being afraid of ghosts does come back a few times, but I don't care because it's funny. Aside from that, there's also just a lot on her background and how rough her upbringing was. She never really had the chance to make many friends in her life, which is a bit sad for sure, but at the same time, this also causes her to have many socially awkward moments, which I just love. She's funny and charming like most of her contenders on this list, but it genuinely feels like she has a lot of depth to her as well. And to top this all off, she was also one of my best units. Ivy was the MVP on my first playthrough, because she just had that many uses. You put the Lin Ring on her and she becomes an incredible magic sweeper. She also has decent defense and resistance, which means she can always tank at least a few hits. And let's not forget, she has access to staves. Ivy was my strongest magic attacker that I could also use to bait out opponents or to support my other allies. She's not perfect, of course. She has a weakness to bows and some problems with a few stats. I just don't mind playing around these flaws, not just because she will be useful regardless, but also because I just love Ivy that much. She really has it all. Great design, great personality, voice acting that's just the best, all while being a beast of a unit. Ivy is by far my favorite character in this game, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And that's the end of the top 10. Thank you very much for watching. I just want to say that the DLC came out while the video was nearly finished, which is why I didn't mention any of the new characters. Some of them look interesting, but I highly doubt I'll like them more than anyone in this video. But hey, feel free to let me know who your favorites are. I'm all for spreading some positivity around. Thanks again for watching. This has been Max, signing out.